Hi guys, it's Circle M. Thanks so much for tuning in. Today we're going to take a look at the Dandelion Shell Tunnel Type Hot Tent. I got this tent because I thought having a hot tent would be pretty cool. Having the ability to have a stove to warm you up in the cold wintertime conditions is very nice. It's a little bit of a luxury though, more than a necessity, but sometimes it's just nice to have cool things. When you buy this tent, you're going to get the tent itself. You'll get 3 different sizes of tent poles. They are labeled to help you put them in the correct order in the tent. You're going to get 22 of these stakes. I think they're actually pretty high quality stakes. They feel pretty strong to me. You can set the tent up with just 4. So these extra ones are more for helping you stake out guy lines and set the tent to your preferences. But if you were trying to do weight savings and carry as little as possible, you could get away with just 4 of these. You're also going to get 6 of the guy lines to help you spread this tent out exactly the way you want. You can use the awning feature like they advertise on their website. The guy lines themselves do not have any flex or stretch to them, so I would be a little cautious when you're setting up your tent to leave a little bit of slack in the line so you don't accidentally put strain on your tent one way or the other. They do come with these handy little toggles. They use a locking jaw on the inside that when you set the loop at a particular size that you might want, they're actually pretty strong and they can hold that shape rather well, to my surprise. So that's a nice little feature to add on to it. This tent is not what I would call a very lightweight tent. As you can see, it's pretty large and it's not very packable. That's how I would say it. So I brought 2 backpacks with me to help you get an idea of the size of this tent and maybe how much room you might have to set aside if you plan to take this with you on your backpacking trip. The first backpack is the Osprey Volt 60. This is a pretty common backpack and they're relatively affordably priced. A lot of people have these. There's a lot of YouTube reviews on these, which is why I didn't do one myself. But if you get an idea for the size of this bag and you can compare it to the size of the tent, if you were to put this tent in a bag of this size or smaller, you would be taking up a lot of space. Currently, all the internal adjustment straps are set out to their maximum size. When we put the tent in, you can see that you will have a decent amount of space here at the top. You'll have about the width of your hand from pinky to thumb. You'll have a little bit of room on the front to stuff other items, but when I squeeze this completely down, it'll give you an idea of the volume that it takes up in this pack. The second bag I have is my LBT. I really like this bag. I did a review of it on the channel not too long ago. This is a rather large military style rucksack. This one would probably be the one I would take if I was trying to take a tent like this one. I think the more solid frame of the bag helps you carry the weight of this tent better, and you still get a lot more room to put other stuff in it compared to a backpacking tent like that Osprey. So now that we've gotten to take a look at about how big it is, let's go outside and set it up. The bag that the tent comes in isn't anything special. It's made of the same material that the tent is, and you can see the outline of my hand here through the material. It's not very thick or very strong, which is my one gripe. Maybe this material is more durable than it appears, but if you're not setting it up in a nice spot, you probably are definitely going to want to use a ground sheet. Now you can see from how large and long this tent is, you are going to need a pretty decent amount of area to set this up if you plan to set it up in its full configuration. My recommendation is to put 2 of the tent stakes in first because you need to pull on them in order to help tension this tent correctly. On the underside of the tent, this black thing is the inner tent. So it's possible, this uses little clips and buckles to attach itself to the main part of the body of the tent. If you want to sleep inside of this black tent, you can, or you can take it out depending on the type of camping you're doing. An important note for setting this up is the two little tent stake holes that are on the bottom here should be aligned with the body of the top part of the tent, and I want to stake these first. I found that works a little bit better in my couple of times in practicing setting this thing up. One problem with the tent and the poles being numbered is that even though there are numbers on the poles, there are not numbers on the tent itself. So what I did is I went and I just took a Sharpie after I figured out which pole went where, and I literally just drew it on the side of the tent in order to be able to put this thing together correctly. This would be especially useful if you are doing this at night or in the dark. The one that goes on the very far end where the internal black tent is going to be number 3. I'm going to check my poles. This one is labeled number 3. The second one is number 2. The final one is number 1. Now that I've put all 3 poles in, I'm going to do the final staking. When I first set this thing up, I tried to do all 4 stakes and then put the poles in, and I found that the tent was kind of fighting me as I did it, and I didn't want to risk ripping it, again, because it is kind of that thin material. So I stake the one side that has the internal tent first, put the poles in, then I'm going to stake the far side. That way I get my tension just right. Now you can see the whole tent set up. Next, I'm going to show you the inside pieces and a little bit about how the zippers and stuff work. Here on the back, this vent uses Velcro and one of the semi-rigid plastic sticks in order to hold the rear vent open, give you a little bit of ventilation. Under these 2 black seams are zippers so that you can open the rear compartment of the tent. They have Velcro to help it stay closed. They want you to remove this part of the tent from the stakes and guy it out to something like a tree. So you could take some of the guy lines or your own, and you could guy this up, and you could have a little flap to either sit under to block you from the sun, or you could use this to get in and out of the tent. I've rolled the door out of the way using the internal little ties. Since you can stake the internal tent separate from the main part of the tent, it still helps it retain its structural integrity. If you did undo these 2, however, the tent would collapse and fall over. So you either have to stake it down or tie it down somehow in order to keep the tent in its upright position. If you wanted to enter the tent from the rear, it would be possible. And if it's hot and you want a little bit of ventilation, you can always close just the screen part of the tent in order to keep that breeze going through. If I were to use this tent during the summer, this is probably what I would do. This material, even though it's thin, does feel to me like it retains a lot of the heat rather well, which is something you want if you're camping in the cold, but like right now where it's over 100 degrees outside, that would be less ideal. Here you can see the internal buckles and hooks that I was mentioning that hold the internal tent to the external tent. If you wanted to, you could remove this black piece and you could sleep with just the deck. At the front of the tent here, we have the stove jack. this can be rolled up and retained. My gripe with this particular design for the stove jack and the flap is that in order to get this thing to hold, you have to do an unusual tucking to keep it retained here in the flap. If you did have a stove jack coming out of here and you left it in its normal rolled configuration, it could, especially with wind blowing it, blow down, touch, and melt when it comes into contact with the smokestack coming out of your stove. So this is one thing that I don't like. You have to tuck it in order to get it to work properly. And if a sufficiently high wind were to come by, I do think that it would pull this down into the stove. It would unravel it from that tuck position. So slight design flaw in my opinion. The stove jack itself does need to be cut for whatever size stove you're going to use. I personally like that. That way you get a custom fit. Just like the back of the tent, there are zippers underneath these flaps, so the front of the tent can be rolled up. One thing that would make this part of the roll-up tent flap difficult to use is the fact that this is where it is staked from. I'm not sure if it was designed intentionally or this is a design flaw, but as soon as you unhook it to roll it up and use it like a door, it will cause the tent to collapse because the stakes are no longer holding it in place. Let's watch. Obviously, if you are going to guide the tent out, this probably wouldn't be a super huge problem, but I don't know any other way for you to be able to secure the tent like this unless you're going to use the internal mainstay with some stakes or some cordage or something in order to keep it held up properly. So I'm going to grab a couple of tent stakes. Let's try that and let's see what happens. With no, even though I've staked it on the bottom, that was not enough to give this thing rigidity to hold it up. Let me try something else. The glue that's holding the Velcro in place is not super strong, so I would be cautious when pulling this apart. I don't know how this is going to hold up over time, but I would suspect that this isn't going to last long under hard use. I got it to hold using two guy lines tied to the side of the tent. However, this arrangement does not give me a lot of confidence because it does not look very strong. I would probably only set it up in this way if it was a very calm, still day, so I don't risk damaging the tent. Looking down inside the tent with a wide-angle lens, you can see these floor buckles. There's two here in the front. There's another one that's in the back underneath the internal tent. They help you set the tension so you can pick how domed you want the tent. Obviously, there's a limit on it because you still have to attach the internal tent in some fashion, so there's going to automatically be a little bit of tension on it, but it is a neat way to customize it at least a little bit. On both sides of the front of the tent, it does have this roll-up side door. The zippers are here underneath the black rain flap. Here's the view from the side. Both doors are identical on both sides, and this would be my primary point in and out of the tent because I still get to use these stable stakes on the front. I can still get into the main body of the tent, but I'm not risking compromising the structure by having to undo the stakes and tie it in an unusual fashion. This is definitely not a glamping tent. You're going to only be able to kneel and be on your hands and your knees here. This is the highest part of the tent here. I can go up a little bit with my head, but this is pretty much the space you're going to be restricted to. This is a positive when it's cold and you have your stove burning right here, is it will help to trap that heat and distribute it evenly throughout the tent, since the tent is evenly spaced versus the teepee kind where it's pointed and all the heat goes up to the top. Now that you're in the tent with me, let's open it up. It uses this half moon style zipper on the front. Here you have the internal body of the tent. You'll notice that the top and the sides are all this lighter mesh material. The bottom is a different material. It's thicker and it's slightly different, but it's very close to the same as the external body of the tent. Again, I would highly recommend that you use a ground sheet with this tent because this material is very thin. You can kind of see me plucking it here between my fingers. I would not use this on any remotely rough surface if I could get away with it. The door itself does have an internal mesh, so if you undo these vent zippers, and then you zip up the main portion of the tent, you get almost a screen house type thing where you have a solid bottom and then you have screen all the way around for maximum ventilation. Finally, this is what I would call the summer configuration. If I was to sleep today, this is how I would set it up because it's miserably hot outside. I've taken 3 guy wires, staked them out, and I've actually looped them internally on the tent where the internal tent latches to the main exterior part of the tent. I am fairly certain that is not what the manufacturer intended or recommended for this, so I'm not sure how strong it would be in a high wind situation. But if you're in nasty weather going for maximum ventilation, I feel like this has the potential to work. Have it completely open on this side with the internal mesh exposed, and then on the back side with this side completely exposed to try to maximize your airflow all the way around. All right, guys, let's tear this thing down. I would recommend that we do it the opposite of the way that we set it up. So I'm going to pull out the stakes on the one side, then I'm going to remove the poles, then I'm going to pull the stakes on the other side. When I go to pack up the tent, since the inner tent is separate from the outer tent, I would recommend that you actually fold it upside down. I'll demonstrate what I mean by that, but I think it helps it pack away better, pack away smaller, and then it makes it easier when you go to unpack it to get it out of the package and set up nicely. Once I've gotten it down roughly to the size I think it needs to be, I'm going to take my retention strap and expand it almost all the way out. That way I can still grab the tab. Then I'm going to compress it. I want to put the round end into the bag rather than the loose end because I want it to flow smoothly into the bag instead of getting bunched up on itself. This end is getting fluffed up as the air escapes it, and as I pack it in the bag, that's why I want this end at the top instead of in the bottom. However, I don't recommend that because, like I was saying, this tent material feels a little flimsy to me, and I suspect that it would be very easy to puncture or cut it if you were not very careful with it. So that does it for my review of the Dandelion Shell Tunnel Style Hot Tent. I hope this review was helpful to you and that you learned something about this tent. Hopefully you're informed if you want to make a purchase about it. Thank you again so much for tuning in, and I hope to see you next time.